Paul Driessen, who was Rachel Carson?
Rachel Carson was, first of all, of course, a scientist for Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of the Interior. She was an author. She was a gifted writer. I read Silent Spring when I was in college. I read The Sea Around Us, and they captivated me. She is a mesmerizing writer, and she is able to take scientific, dry scientific information and put it in vibrant, colorful words that just captivate you.
So was she well known before Silent Spring came out in 1962?
She had The Sea Around Us, which was a pretty big seller. That's what got me interested in marine biology and scuba diving and things like that.
And that was published in the 50s, early 50s?
I believe so. I should have checked before I came on, but yes, I'm quite sure of that.
What was the impact of Silent Spring in 1962 when it came out?
It was pretty serious impact. It touched on a lot of themes that had been on people's minds. It created alarms. It presented in a poetic way and an alarming way what might be happening out there. And it was almost presented as it was happening, even though much of it was conjectural and speculation. It was presented as, this is happening. We are using so many chemicals, so many insecticides that we are going to kill off our songbirds. We are going to be left with a silent spring in which there are no songbirds. We are going to kill off the bald eagle with our insecticides. And it got people scared. She did a marvelous job of raising people's awareness that a lot of what we were doing was poisoning the environment, the air, the water, the land. She did it in a way that got people emotionalized, made them want to get involved, to take steps to solve the problem, to end the despoliation of our environment.
Were insecticides new at that time?
The modern kind of insecticides were. I mean, they used some pretty nasty stuff for a long time. Copper sulfates for certain things and a wide variety of other things.
And we don't use those today at all?
They use copper sulfate actually in organic farming. But they used a lot of pretty toxic chemicals, not only to control insects, but to take care of the diseases that people had. You would ingest stuff that would almost be worse than what you were trying to get rid of yourself. But the modern insecticides came about essentially in World War II. DDT was probably the first one, and it was very effective. We dusted our soldiers with it in the Pacific and in the Sicilian campaign in Europe. We dusted millions and millions of Germans and Italians and Holocaust survivors after the war to prevent typhus. They used DDT very widely in the South Pacific to prevent malaria, to kill the mosquitoes. And then after the war, basically 1945 was the first test case of DDT in the Tennessee Valley area. Beyond that, they decided it's so effective against mosquitoes, we can get rid of malaria in the United States and in Europe. So they started spraying it all over. It was also used then a lot for agriculture.
What are the effects of DDT?
That's
the known effects of DDT.
The known effects, where you want to talk about real scientific evidence, are pretty slim. Rashes on your skin. There's a lot of conjecture, but DDT is probably the single most studied chemical in history.
Because of Silent Spring?
Partly. But Silent Spring was followed after Rachel Carson's death by a concerted campaign by Environmental Defense Fund and other environmental organizations, essentially to launch the environmental movement, to give it a prestige, a power base, a funding base that it never had enjoyed before. So those things in combination and the pressure that was brought against DDT eventually got it banned in 1972 by William Ruckelshaus under President Nixon. But in the meantime, it was used all over the world. It was used tremendously in the United States. You can see old video or old film footage of people dancing in clouds of DDT, people in swimming pools with clouds of DDT being wafted around, and people at their picnic tables. So it was very widely used, and though it was studied and studied, nothing more than tangential and speculative links to diseases and cancer and so forth were ever established. There were concerns about egg shells, and we can get into that if you wish, but again, a lot of conjecture, not good solid proof.
And we will get into that, but good evening. This is Book TV in prime time, and tonight's discussion live call-in program is about Rachel Carson and her book, Silent Spring, published in 1962. We are joined by Paul Driessen, who you've been listening to right now. He's a senior fellow with the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, and he's also with the Congress for Racial Equality. He's got a law degree from the University of Denver, a BA in geology and field ecology from Lawrence University, and this is his book, Eco-Imperialism, Green Power, Black Death. And we are also joined by Linda Lear down in Charleston, South Carolina, who is Rachel Carson's biographer. And her book is called Rachel Carson, Witness for Nature. And in fact, Ms. Lear has written the introduction to the new edition of Silent Spring that came out in 2009. Linda Lear, what got you interested in Rachel Carson?
Well, originally it was because I was teaching environmental history at the university level, and when we got to talking about Silent Spring in 1962, my students looked at me and said, "Rachel who?" And I thought, oh my, we have to do something about this. So I set about trying to write Carson's biography, which had never been done.
And we want to get you involved too. This is a call-in program. We're going to put the numbers up on the screen so you can dial in and talk to Linda Lear and Paul Driessen. 202 is the area code. If you live in the East or Central time zone, 737-0001 is the number for you to call. 737-0002 for the Mountain and Pacific time zones. Send us an email, booktv@cspan.org, or send us a tweet at booktv@twitter.com is our Twitter address. Linda Lear, was it a bestseller when it came out in 1962?
Indeed it was. It was a blockbuster. It had been serialized in the New Yorker magazine in 3 parts beginning in June. And it was nothing but a stunning, anything but silent summer. When the book was finally published in September of that year, it was already a bestseller. John F. Kennedy helped a lot to call attention to Rachel Carson's ideas by commenting on them in a press conference and by setting up a presidential advisory committee to look into her claims about the massive contamination of the environment by chemical pesticides.
When you say her claims, where did she get her knowledge?
Carson had studied, she was an ecologist by training, a marine biologist, an ecologist. She had impeccable credentials. She was an MA from Johns Hopkins. She did not have a PhD degree, but she had worked all her life at the Fish and Wildlife Service and in government and had read and studied the ocean for her great bestseller, The Sea Around Us, and then subsequently The Edge of the Sea. She did impeccable research. She was not a person who was writing for the academic community. And the really remarkable thing was that Carson insisted on writing for the public. She wanted the public to know about what was happening in their world.
Paul Driessen, she was a marine biologist?
Yes.
And she was writing here, though, about non-marine issues. Is that correct?
Well, you study much the same. I was a freshwater ecologist major in college, along with my geology. And there's a tremendous crossover, lands to waters. I mean, you look out your door and they're interconnected, and the marine aspects are interconnected. So she was drifting a little bit afield of where she was trained, but not all that much. The bigger problem that I found with Rachel Carson and some of her work is that she tended to go on the basis of some hunches and speculation and conjecture or anecdotal evidence, and not always well backed up, and sometimes she was not that familiar with or ignored some of the very good literature about DDT, for example, that was out there, and she made some conclusions that were not based in the science that was available at the time.